Hello. We present here an excerpt from the conference debate held in Paris on April 24, 2024 on the theme, Oppression of Peoples Under Authoritarian Regimes. This excerpt deals with the case of Kabylia.
The following points will be developed, first some historical reminders, then the Kabyle Spring of 1980 and 2001, the Zero Kabyle Plan and its consequences, namely the criminalization of political activity, the attempted genocide of 2021. Mass imprisonments, and the 2022 Stalinist trial. Then on the instrumentalization of the ISTN. To finish with the goals and actions of the independence movement.
The existence of the Kabyle nation dates back several millennia. It is attested in African historiography in the treatise on geography of the Greek Ptolemy in the 2nd century. The imminence of this nation is the confederal structure of the Kabyle tribes living in the territory of Kabylia and sharing a specific language, culture, identity and social organization. It was strengthened over the centuries by its resistance to several invasions, Roman, Arab, Ottoman, French. The Kabyle people lost his sovereignty at the Battle of Icherriden on the 24th of June 1857 against the French army. The advantage of the number and the quality of the armament of the French soldiers led by several marshals played against the fierce Kabyle warriors led by 𝐏𝐿𝐿, who was captured and imprisoned. 𝐏𝐿𝐿 died in prison a few years later. It is important to note that there was no signing of any act of surrender or armistice. France arbitrarily annexed Kabylia to French Algeria, which it had just created in 1839. Kabylia did not abdicate and entered a permanent resistance against the French occupier. The Kabyle insurrection of 1871 led by 𝐏𝐿𝐿 made it possible to drive the French army out of all Kabyle territory. But the military reinforcements sent from France severely repressed this uprising. The colossal war toll inflicted on the Kabyle people and the plunder of their land reduced them to total misery for decades. At the beginning of the 19th century, the Kabyles adopted political struggle and structured the national movement in an alliance with the other peoples of Algeria. Political movements, INA, MTLD, or Armed, OS, ALN, are set up. The war against French colonization from 1954 to 1962 was mainly waged by the Kabyles.
From the end of the French colonization in 1962, a military dictatorship was set up in Algiers. A dictatorship of the most fascist, which rests on an Arab-Islamic ideology and which has made the denial of Kabylity and Amazigh in general its credo. Kabylia inevitably entered into a secession war against the Algerian regime from 1963 to 1965. In Kabylia, the tanks of the Algerian army simply replaced the French tanks. This war caused the death of nearly 500 Kabyle fighters and thousands of wounded. A new anti-colonial struggle had just begun and it continues to this day. The Algerian regime uses all means to reduce Kabylia, including political assassinations, Krim Bekasem, Ali Mesili, Lounes Matoub, etc. While Kabylia opposes a multifaceted resistance, linguistic, cultural, political, school boycott, electoral boycotts, etc.
The Kabyle Spring. There was first the Berber Spring of 1980. This uprising against the Algerian dictatorship was provoked by the ban by the Algerian regime of the Conference of Mouloud Mamari, planned at the University of Tizi Ouzou, on ancient Kabyle poetry. A general strike in Kabylia was launched by Kabyle students. It is followed by the entire population. And in all the cities of Kabylia, popular demonstrations are organized. The Algerian regime responded with the intervention of the army and total isolation of the entire Kabyle territory. The insurrection is general and there are scenes of urban guerrilla warfare. All institutions and emblems of the Algerian state are attacked, while the university is occupied by the army. This Berber Spring had an impact on all the Amazigh peoples of North Africa.
Then came the Black Spring from 2001 to 2003. The revolt was provoked by the assassination of high school student Germa Massinissa inside the gendarmerie of 8 Douala. The young Massinissa, who was to pass his baccalaureate in June, was arbitrarily arrested on April 18, 2001 by racist and febrile gendarmes, as the commemoration of the Berber Spring approached. The Algerian regime responded with fierce repression against young peaceful demonstrators, by allowing the use of explosive live ammunition. The Kabyle people, aware of the gravity of the situation, set up the Archers Citizen Movement, formed on the ancestral Confederate structure of the Archers. On June 14, 2001, a gigantic march of about 2.5 million Kabyle demonstrators broke into Algiers. Never in human memory had such a march been organized. The march was severely repressed, and there were 10 deaths. This Black Spring lasted until 2003 and was marked by sporadic clashes between demonstrators and gendarmes for 2 years. The toll is very heavy, more than 128 dead and nearly 5,000 injured, including many disabled for life. To date, while the murder gendarmes are well identified, no judgment of these murderers or the sponsors of the crimes has taken place. A turning point in the history of Kabylia had just occurred, and there was the emergence of the MAK, Movement for the Autonomy of Kabylia, which would become the Movement for the Self-Determination of Kabylia.
The Zero Kabyle Plan. A kind of Machiavellian colloquium, called Zero Kabyle, was organized from 18 to the 20th of August 2019 near Mostaganem, under the protection of the Algerian gendarmerie. This plan aims neither more nor less than the eradication of all Kabyle opposition and the end once and for all of Kabyle irredentism. It paves the way for a new form of all-out repression. The following examples show the variety of new forms of repression. Racist comments are publicly assumed by Algerian members of parliament and all official media without any legal action. Kabyle and Amazigh flags and the Kabyle dress were banned in the demonstrations, before these demonstrations were themselves banned.
Up to the scientific, cultural activity that was targeted. The many literary cafes were all closed one after the other.
The few political parties, which are the democratic alibi of the regime in the eyes of international opinion, have had their meetings banned. The only activities tolerated are those, organized by the clerks of the regime.
Criminalizing political activity. Since 2019, the regime has intensified its repressive policy towards political activity. In June 2021, Article 87 bis of the Criminal Code was promulgated, allowing the regime to classify any act of political opposition as terrorism. The unavowed aim of this scurrilous article is to classify the movement for the self-determination of Kabylia, which is fundamentally peaceful, as terrorist. In order to implement this article, the regime has completely subjugated the judiciary, and there is talk of telephone justice. The sentences handed down by corrupt judges are dictated by those in power in the regime. Under Article 87 bis, hundreds of Kabyles have been convicted. Courageous lawyers, who dare to denounce convictions based on empty files and spurious accusations, are threatened with death and forced into exile. This Article 87 bis is regularly denounced by political figures, in particular Kabyle independence fighters, as well as by several non-governmental organizations, United Nations human rights rapporteurs and several countries.
Faced with the rise of the independence movement in Kabylia, the Algerian regime panicked and committed the unthinkable. An attempt at genocide. On the 9th of August 2021, Kabylia experienced the deadliest fires in its history. The Algerian authorities immediately announced that the fires were of criminal origin. It could not have been mistaken, since it was the work of its own services. A large number of simultaneous fires set at precisely the right intervals could only have been caused by the use of sophisticated technical means. There were reports of army helicopters flying overhead and dropping flammable substances, probably white phosphorus. Hundreds of people were burnt to death. Thousands of hectares were burnt and wildlife wiped out. The Kabyles watched helplessly as scenes of apocalypse unfolded. In the same breath, the Algerian regime accused Morocco, Israel and the MAK. Curiously, the accusations against Morocco and Israel were not followed up. This disaster was organized at a time when the COVID pandemic was raging. The Algerian regime knowingly aggravated this pandemic by blocking aid from the Kabyle diaspora. A complaint for attempted genocide has been lodged with the ICC by the president of the MAK.
The Algerian political police skillfully practiced the techniques of the German Stasi and Ceausescu's Securitate. After a wave of mass arrests and imprisonments of peaceful Kabyle citizens in 2021, the Algerian regime organized a parody of a Stalinist trial in November 2022. A 3-day trial during which 102 sentences were handed down, including 54 death sentences. An all-time record. Cases of torture have been reported by prisoners to judges. These subservient judges, in the service of the regime, take no action. Algerian justice ensures total impunity for torturers.
Whereas in the 1960s and 1970s, Algerians had to obtain an exit permit to travel abroad, Since 2021, the Algerian regime has been innovating by using and abusing the ban on leaving the national territory, ISTN.
Its objectives are clear. The aim is to prevent people from testifying in the foreign media about human rights abuses in Algeria and to cut off the Kabyle population from its diaspora in order to undermine the demand for independence. At the same time, it reduces the strengthening of Kabyle pro-independence ranks abroad. Tens of thousands of exit bans have been imposed on Kabyles. Many academics, intellectuals, artists and writers are banned from leaving the country. The ISTN is a ban on entry to Kabylia for Kabyles in the diaspora who have expressed the slightest criticism of the Algerian regime. It is a de facto ban on entry for Kabylyan political activists living abroad.
To conclude, let us recall the aims of the independence movement and cite its main actions. The fundamental demand of the Kabyle independence movement, whose actions are essentially peaceful, is the organization of a referendum on self-determination through a process of decolonization of Kabylia, in accordance with international law. Numerous achievements have been made, in particular the establishment of the institutions of the Kabyle state, government, parliament, constitution, economic council, demarcation of borders, etc. The Kabyle people reject all Algerian elections, and consider the Algerian forces of repression to be colonial occupying forces. The diaspora's diplomatic activities focus mainly on the internationalization of the Kabyle question and recognition of the Kabyle state. Thanks for your attention.